I had been walking through the glass doors of the Westbridge Country Club for as long as I could remember. It was my family's pride, or, more accurately, their identity. An 18-hole championship golf course, an Olympic-sized pool that glittered like polished silver under the sun, tennis courts that had hosted regional tournaments, and a dining room where million-dollar deals were whispered over perfectly aged steaks. I practically grew up there. My childhood birthdays were celebrated in its rose garden. My teenage summers spent near the pool pretending to belong. Every Sunday, we were there. My father's crisp handshake to the staff, my mother's polite smile that never quite reached her eyes, and my sister Vanessa's picture-perfect posture that screamed we are the Hartleys. And then there was me. The other daughter. The one who didn't quite fit. Vanessa, at 35, was the shining example of success, Ivy League graduate, married to a corporate attorney, volunteer coordinator for 3 prestigious charities. She wore designer clothes like armor and knew the perfect wine pairing for every meal. I, on the other hand, had dropped out of college after 2 years. I'd been a barista, a retail manager, an administrative assistant. My parents called it career confusion. I called it finding my footing. But to them, I was the family disappointment, the one who didn't carry the Hartley perfection. That Sunday morning, I made the mistake of arriving at the club for brunch in jeans. Simple blue jeans, a casual blazer, and a pair of comfortable flats. I'd spent the drive convincing myself it didn't matter, that maybe, just maybe, my family would care more about seeing me than judging what I wore. I was wrong. When I entered the terrace, my father was already seated at our usual table, silver hair gleaming under the sun. His expression curdled the moment he saw me. "Absolutely not," he said, loud enough for 3 nearby tables to look up. "You are not sitting with us dressed like that." I froze. "Hi, Dad," I tried. "Good to see you too." My mother set down her mimosa like it had personally offended her. "Emma," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What are you wearing?" "Clothes," I replied, forcing a small laugh. "You invited me to brunch." "I invited you," she corrected coldly, "assuming you would dress appropriately. This is the Westbridge, not a shopping mall." Before I could answer, Vanessa appeared from the direction of the ladies' room, flawless as always, in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to. She saw me and actually stopped walking. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Emma, are you serious right now?" "About what?" I asked. "About showing up here looking like that." She gestured at me, my entire existence, apparently. "There's a dress code." "I'm aware," I said evenly. Dad pushed his chair back and stood, towering over me with that commanding energy that came from decades of being in charge. "This is embarrassing," he said. "My daughter shows up at the Westbridge in bargain bin clothes. Do you have any idea how this reflects on me? On this family?" I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "I'm wearing a blazer," I said quietly. He gave me a withering look. "A blazer from where? Walmart?" "Actually, yes." My mother made a sound like I'd confessed to a crime. "Emma Catherine Hartley, you will leave this club immediately and return when you're dressed appropriately. Or better yet, don't return at all." Around us, the whispers had started, murmurs from people who'd known us for years. The Vandermeers, the Clarksons, the Millers, all looking at me like a scandal had walked into their brunch. "I was invited," I said softly. "You called me Thursday. You asked me to join you." "I assumed," my mother snapped, "you had the common sense to dress properly. Clearly, I overestimated you. Again." Vanessa leaned closer, her tone sharp but hushed. "Emma, you're making a scene. Everyone's staring. Just go home, change, and come back. Please." "I drove an hour to get here." "Then you should have thought about that before leaving the house looking like a homeless." She stopped herself, but the damage was done. Dad's face turned red. "Leave," he ordered. "Before you embarrass this family any further." "I haven't done anything wrong," I said, but my voice trembled. "Your presence is the embarrassment," my mother hissed. The words hit harder than I expected. She didn't even try to whisper them. For a moment, I thought about leaving, about walking back to my car and disappearing like I'd done countless times before. But something inside me snapped. 10 years of being dismissed, judged, and quietly mocked, all the dinners where I was the other daughter, it all rose like a tide I couldn't push down. I took a step forward instead. "Why do you care so much about what people think?" I asked. "You've turned every Sunday brunch into a reputation contest. You don't even talk to each other like family anymore, just business associates at a PR event." My mother's face hardened. "You're speaking out of turn." "Am I?" I asked. "Or am I finally saying what you've all been thinking, that I'll never be good enough for this version of family you've created?" For a second, no one spoke. Even the waiters nearby froze, pretending not to hear. Then Dad's voice cut through the silence. "Enough. I'll have you escorted out." He pulled out his phone, calling over the concierge. The words didn't register at first. Escorted out. Like I was a stranger causing trouble. Like I wasn't their daughter. "Dad, please. Do not argue with me," he shouted, and heads turned from nearby tables. "You've humiliated this family enough for one day." That was it. I felt something inside me close. The last thread that still tied me to their approval, gone. I turned without another word and walked inside the main building, not because I was leaving, but because I couldn't let them have the final word. The marble floors echoed under my shoes as I approached the concierge desk. My father's voice was already echoing through the lobby. "There's a situation on the terrace," he was saying. "My daughter arrived inappropriately dressed, and I need her removed from the premises." The young woman behind the desk looked startled. "Sir, if she's your guest." "She's not my guest anymore," Dad snapped. "Revoke her access immediately." The concierge hesitated, then excused herself to find a manager. I stood there, silently watching my father pace, impatient, red-faced, still muttering about family image and standards. I wondered what he'd do if he knew the truth. If he knew that the daughter he was trying to remove from the club was the one who had saved it from bankruptcy months ago. But not yet. Not today. For now, I let him have his illusion, the power, the control, the pride that had blinded him for years. Because soon, everything he thought he knew about me was going to change. And when it did, it wouldn't be revenge. It would be justice. They say humiliation burns for a moment, but the scars it leaves can last a lifetime. That day at the country club, the way my family dismissed me like I was a stain on their reputation, didn't just sting. It transformed me. But my story didn't start there. My fall from grace, as my parents like to call it, began almost a decade earlier. I was 24, fresh out of college, or at least, I would have been if I hadn't dropped out in my second year. Architecture wasn't for me. The late nights drafting endless lines for buildings I didn't care about made me feel like a fraud. When I told my parents I wanted to take a break to figure myself out, my father laughed, the cold, cutting kind of laugh that left no room for argument. "People like you," he'd said, "don't take breaks. They take steps backward." That was the day I left home. No dramatic shouting match, no storming out, just me, a suitcase, and a quiet goodbye note I slipped under their door. For a while, life was a blur of cheap apartments and uncertain mornings. I worked in a cafe called the Copper Bean, a tiny place with flickering lights and the smell of burnt espresso permanently embedded in the walls. It was there I learned the rhythm of real work, 5 a.m. openings, cranky customers, and the bittersweet pride of earning my first paycheck that didn't come from my parents' name. My co-workers became my first real friends, people who didn't care about my last name, only whether I could handle the morning rush. When the owner, an older woman named Linda, saw how I handled customers, she taught me everything she knew about running a business, managing suppliers, balancing books, motivating staff. She'd been in hospitality for 40 years, and she used to say, "People don't come for the coffee, Emma. They come for how you make them feel." After a year, Linda sold the cafe. She offered me a small severance and a recommendation letter that, at the time, I didn't know would change my life. I moved to the city, to a neighborhood that smelled like ambition and exhaust fumes. I took a front desk job at a small boutique hotel called the Violet Inn. The pay was terrible, the hours long, But I fell in love with the rhythm of hospitality, the constant hum of stories walking in and out through revolving doors. Guests came from everywhere: business travelers, newlyweds, families, dreamers, each with a story, each with a need. And I was there, solving problems, smiling through exhaustion, learning the unspoken art of making people feel seen. I started noticing things: how small gestures created big impressions. A handwritten note on a guest's pillow after a long flight. A quiet upgrade for a couple celebrating an anniversary. Little acts that turned service into connection. Within 2 years, I was promoted to assistant manager. By 28, I became general manager of a sister property, the Blue Orchid Hotel. That was the first time I saw my name engraved on an office door. Emma Hartley, general manager. I remember running my fingers across it, trying not to cry. No one from my family congratulated me. They didn't even know. 3 years later, when the pandemic hit, hotels everywhere were closing down. I lost my job, my savings, and my direction, all in the span of 2 months. But giving up wasn't an option anymore. I started consulting, helping small lodges and struggling inns reinvent themselves. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. And slowly, people began to notice. One project led to another. Then a friend introduced me to an investor looking to revive a failing resort 2 towns over. That's how the Willow Crest was born. It wasn't much at first, a forgotten lakeside property with broken windows and peeling paint. But when I stood there on the cracked front steps, smelling the damp air, I saw potential. Where others saw decay, I saw a future. For 2 years, I poured everything into that place. I learned to negotiate contracts, oversee renovations, design marketing campaigns. Things I never thought I'd be capable of. Every late night spent painting walls, every tear shed over failed permits and lost funds, it all shaped me. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., drive to the site with a thermos of coffee, and work until my hands ached. Sometimes I slept in the unfinished rooms because I couldn't afford to go home. But every morning, I'd look out over that misty lake and tell myself, one day, this will be worth it. And it was. 2 years later, the Willow Crest Resort opened its doors. It wasn't just successful, it thrived. Within 6 months, we were featured in Travel Digest as one of the top boutique retreats in the region. Guests came for the lake view, but they stayed because of the warmth, the care, the heart I'd poured into every detail. And for the first time, I felt something I'd never felt before: not approval, not validation, but peace. I kept my success quiet. Maybe part of me wanted to prove that I could exist without their recognition. That I didn't need my family's last name to build something of my own. But then, a year ago, fate played its hand. I was approached by a real estate investment group, Sterling Holdings, to join their acquisitions team as a partner. They wanted someone who understood the soul of hospitality, not just the numbers. They'd heard about my work with Willow Crest. When I joined, I discovered something ironic. The firm had just acquired a debt portfolio that included several properties, including one I knew very well, the West Bridge Country Club. It had been struggling financially for years, buried under unpaid maintenance and declining memberships. The board had quietly sought investors to save it. They had no idea that I, the daughter they'd humiliated and cast out, was now sitting in the room that would decide its future. I didn't speak during the first few meetings. I just listened, to the numbers, to the board's desperation, to the way they clung to image while drowning in debt. When the time came for recommendations, my team voted to restructure ownership. I offered a proposal, one that would preserve the club's legacy but transfer controlling interest to Sterling Holdings. It was approved. And when the papers were signed, my partners congratulated me for closing the deal that saved West Bridge. None of them knew it was personal. I remember walking through the old clubhouse the day the ownership changed hands. The hall still smelled like polished oak and expensive perfume. The portraits of board members, including my father's, lined the walls, staring down like silent judges. But this time, I wasn't the girl who didn't belong. I wasn't the embarrassment. I was the woman who now owned the place. So when my father stood there on the terrace, demanding I be escorted out, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt clarity. Because he didn't know. Not yet. He had no idea that the family disgrace he wanted removed was the one who'd just been named the new majority owner of Westbridge Country Club. The girl he once dismissed had become the woman holding the keys to everything he valued. But I wasn't there to humiliate him. I was there to reclaim something far more important: myself. When I left the terrace that morning, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from restraint. Every instinct in me wanted to scream the truth, that I wasn't the embarrassment they thought I was, that everything they clung to now belonged to me. But I didn't. I drove away quietly, letting their words echo until the noise faded into something else: purpose. That night, as I sat in my apartment overlooking the city skyline, I got the email confirming the board's final approval. The legal transfer had gone through. The Westbridge Country Club was now under my ownership, officially and completely. I reread the email 3 times before it sank in. After years of humiliation, struggle, and silence, I finally held the power that once crushed me. And yet, all I felt was calm. Not vengeance. Not pride. Just peace, the kind that comes from finally closing a circle that's been open for too long. I returned to the club the following Sunday. The same polished floors. The same manicured gardens. The same place that once rejected me, now greeting me as its owner. I arrived early, before the brunch crowd, and met with Mr. Langston, the operations director who had managed the club for nearly 2 decades. A kind, loyal man with silver hair and sharp eyes. He'd been the one quietly holding the place together while the board ignored reality. When I entered his office, he stood immediately. "Ms. Hartley. Welcome back." The way he said my name, Ms. Hartley, held no mockery this time. Only respect. "Thank you, Mr. Langston," I said. "I'm looking forward to working with you." He smiled, almost knowingly. "You have no idea how long this place needed new leadership." "Maybe I do," I said softly. We went over the schedule for the morning. The board had planned a members' brunch to discuss the new ownership announcement, unaware that the mysterious buyer they'd been speculating about for weeks was standing right there. I could already imagine my father's face when he realized. But more than that, I wanted him to listen. Just once. By noon, the terrace was buzzing again. Laughter, silverware, the scent of citrus and coffee filling the air. My mother sat beside my father, both impeccably dressed, faces calm but tight, the kind of calm they wore when pretending everything was fine. Vanessa was there too, scrolling through her phone, no doubt updating her followers about her family brunch at the club. When Mr. Langston stepped to the podium, the chatter died down. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began. "Good afternoon, esteemed members. As many of you know, the Westbridge Country Club has recently undergone a change in ownership. Today, we have the privilege of introducing the new majority stakeholder and executive director, someone deeply connected to this community and this institution." My father straightened, curious but relaxed. He had probably convinced himself it was one of his business associates, maybe even an old golfing friend. Mr. Langston continued, his voice clear and steady. "Please join me in welcoming Ms. Emma Hartley." Silence. You could hear the clink of a spoon dropping somewhere near the back. All eyes turned to me as I stepped onto the terrace. My father's face went white. My mother blinked, as if her mind was refusing to process what she was seeing. Vanessa froze mid-scroll, her phone lowering in slow motion. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice steady, calm, every word measured. "It's good to be back at Westbridge." The crowd murmured, quiet, confused whispers rippling through the tables. I looked directly at my parents. I know this might be a surprise. It was for me, too, when I learned that the club my family cherished was in financial trouble. Fortunately, the previous board made the decision to partner with Sterling Holdings for support. I'm a managing partner there. Vanessa's jaw dropped. "You're what?" "I'm the new majority owner," I said, turning to face the audience. "And it's my privilege to continue Westbridge's legacy, not by erasing its traditions, but by opening its doors wider than ever before." My father stood abruptly. "This is a joke," he snapped. "Some kind of." "It's not a joke, Dad." I met his eyes. "The paperwork's official. You can check the registrar yourself." He stared at me like I'd grown two heads. You can't possibly expect anyone to believe you bought this place. I didn't just buy it, I said quietly. I saved it. Murmurs filled the terrace again. I let the silence settle before continuing. A year ago, Westbridge was weeks away from bankruptcy. Staff were unpaid. Maintenance was deferred. Memberships were declining. Sterling Holdings stepped in, and I led that acquisition. We've spent the last 6 months restructuring the finances and ensuring the staff could stay employed. My mother's face tightened. Why didn't you tell us? She whispered. I looked at her, not with anger, but with honesty. Would you have listened? She didn't answer. My father's voice cut through the quiet. You think this makes you better than us? Owning this place doesn't change who you are. I smiled slightly. You're right. It doesn't change who I am. But it does show who I've become. For the first time, he didn't have a response. Vanessa looked between us, her voice small. Emma, why didn't you say anything all these years? Because I wanted to build something without your permission, I said. I wanted to succeed on my own, not as the daughter you tolerated, but as the woman I chose to be. Mr. Langston stepped forward again. Ms. Hartley has also made it clear that she intends to honor Westbridge's history, while introducing new programs for local youth and community access. The goal is not to exclude, but to expand. There was a round of polite applause, hesitant at first, then growing. I looked out at the faces, the same people who once whispered when I walked by, and I smiled. Not out of pride, but relief. Because I'd finally rewritten the story. When the crowd dispersed, my family remained seated. For the first time in my life, they looked small, not because I'd diminished them, but because their power had always been an illusion. My father finally spoke, his tone low. So this is your revenge? No, I said simply. This is my beginning. He looked down at his hands, unable to meet my eyes. You've humiliated me. No, I replied. You did that to yourself, years ago, on this same terrace. All I did was show you what you refused to see. My mother's voice trembled. What do you want from us, Emma? I thought about it. Then shook my head. Nothing. I have everything I need. I turned to leave, then paused. But if you ever decide you want to know me, not the version you imagined, but the real me, my door's open. For once. And with that, I walked away. As I crossed the marble floor of the lobby, I caught my reflection in the same mirror that once reflected my shame. Only this time, I didn't see the outcast or the failure. I saw a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up. Not perfect. Not vengeful. Just whole. And that, more than ownership, more than victory, was the real reveal. The headlines came and went. Local entrepreneur revives historic Westbridge Club. Members returned, staff smiled again, and the once crumbling hallways began to feel alive. But beneath the polished surface, I felt something else, a deep, unexpected stillness. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing approval or escaping rejection. I was simply being. The first project I approved as owner wasn't a new dining wing or an elite membership drive. It was the Community Initiative Program, open tennis lessons for kids, cooking workshops for hospitality students, and weekend events supporting local artists. People said it was unusual for a private club. But I wanted Westbridge to represent what hospitality truly meant, not exclusion, but belonging. I often walked the grounds early in the morning, when the mist still clung to the lawns and the world felt quiet. Sometimes I'd pause near the rose garden, the same place where my childhood birthdays were once celebrated, and just breathe. Every petal, every dew drop, seemed like a piece of memory returning home in a new form. One of those mornings, about a month after the reveal, I heard footsteps behind me. Beautiful, isn't it? I turned to find Vanessa standing there, her arms folded, her usual confidence replaced with hesitation. It always was, I said softly. She looked around, then at me. I didn't know how to face you after everything. I smiled faintly. You don't have to explain, Vanessa. She shook her head. No, I do. I was awful to you. I thought I was protecting the family image, But really, I was just protecting my own pride. I let her words hang in the air. We all did what we thought we had to. She exhaled, a shaky sound that almost broke. I told Mom and Dad what you said after the meeting. About your door being open. They didn't know how to take it. I figured, I said. They're embarrassed. Not just because of what happened, but because they realize how wrong they were. Especially Dad. He hasn't been himself since that day. For a moment, we stood there in silence. Two sisters who had grown up under the same roof but never really met until now. I used to envy you, I said quietly. You were everything they wanted. I thought you had it easy. Vanessa gave a sad laugh. And I envied you. Because you had the courage to walk away. We both smiled, the first genuine one between us in years. When she finally left, I stayed in the garden a little longer, feeling the sun warm my face. For the first time, I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter. I just felt seen. Later that week, my phone rang while I was in my office. The screen showed a name I hadn't seen in a long time. Dad. I stared at it for a few seconds before answering. Hello. His voice was quiet, almost uncertain. Emma. Hi, Dad. I heard about the new programs you're running here. The scholarships, the youth events. Yes, I said carefully. It's something I've wanted to do for a while. A pause. Then, softer than I expected. They're good ideas. Your grandfather would have been proud. That surprised me. He never used to speak like that. I didn't call to talk about the club, he continued. I wanted to say. I was wrong. About you. I closed my eyes. Those were words I'd never thought I'd hear. You built something out of nothing, he said. And you did it without help. I didn't see your strength before. I only saw what you weren't. I swallowed hard. Dad, I didn't do this to prove you wrong. I know, he said. That's what makes it harder. You did it to make something right. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Just quiet breathing between two people learning how to be family again. Before hanging up, he said softly, maybe we could have dinner. Just us. No expectations. Yeah, I said, smiling. I'd like that. That night, I stayed late in the clubhouse after everyone had gone home. The lights from the chandeliers shimmered across the polished floor, and the quiet hum of the night surrounded me. I sat near the window overlooking the golf course, the same terrace where I'd once stood in humiliation. And I thought about everything that had happened, the failures, the loneliness, the years of struggle. Every part of me that had been tested and reshaped by pain. It wasn't the ownership or success that healed me. It was the journey, the people I met, the lessons I learned, the realization that worth isn't measured by validation, but by resilience. I used to believe power came from having control. Now I know it comes from compassion, for yourself and for others. Because humility isn't about lowering yourself. It's about standing tall without needing to make anyone else smaller. A few weeks later, the club hosted its first community Sunday. Local families filled the gardens, kids laughed on the tennis courts, and the ballroom echoed with music from a small orchestra. Even my parents showed up, quietly, without an entourage or pretense. They stayed near the back, watching, not speaking much. But when I passed by, my mother reached out and touched my arm. You did well, Emma, she said softly. Not as an admission of defeat, but as a mother trying to rebuild a bridge she'd burned. I smiled. We did. And for a brief second, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. Pride. Not the kind wrapped in status or reputation, but the kind born of love. That was enough.